Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Building the Ultimate Customer Service Workforce to Train, Motivate and Empower Agents. I'd like to extend a thank you to every one of the over 1,000 of you joining us today. We're really excited to have you all join our discussion. While we wait for those who are still joining the webinar, I'll run you through a brief introduction to our fantastic panel and go over a few bits of housekeeping so that we can keep things running smoothly. Myself, I'm Scott Cormack, Global Event Director here at Reuters Events. You can now put a face to the name of the emails you've all been receiving for the last 2 weeks. We've got a great panel of superb customer care leaders today who are eager to dive into our discussion, so I'll waste no time in introducing them. First up, we have Donald Hicks, Vice President of Global Ops and Customer Experience at Twitter. Donald is a close friend of us here at Reuters Events and is the first of today's panel who will be featuring as a speaker at our virtual event in November. Donald has a resume that boasts customer care roles at Twitter, Facebook, Google, and Amazon, so we're really excited to bring his wealth of experience to the panel today. Next up, we have Colin Crowley, Vice President of Customer Experience at Freshly. Colin is becoming a bit of a veteran of our webinars now, and there's a reason why we keep inviting him back. His expert insights truly add incredible value to the sessions, and we love working with him. Colin has built a best-in-class customer service team of over 220 from the ground up, and so we couldn't think of anyone better to lend his expertise to this panel today. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to Doug Cramon, Senior Director of Fan Support and Customer Care Ops at ESPN. This is his first experience of one of our panels today, but Doug has been leading customer care at ESPN for over 15 years. In this time, he's won multiple ESPN Leadership Awards for building a world-class training program that's resulted in increased customer satisfaction ratings. And then rounding out today's busy panel, we have Emily Gray, Vice President of Customer Success at today's sponsor, Playvox. Playvox have been long-time partners with us, and we're pleased to be collaborating with them again on this fantastic webinar. Playvox arms modern businesses and BPOs with the most comprehensive, collaborative, and insightful agent optimization suite of quality assurance, performance management, coaching, learning, and agent motivation software. Finally, I'd like to welcome back a man who I'm quickly beginning to run out of adjectives for in these intros, Nicholas Zeisler. We're grateful to have you return and lead the line for another one of our customer service webinars. Nicholas is the principal of Zeisler Consulting and a former director of CX at HP, and we're excited to continue to have his expertise feature throughout our webinars. Before we kick things off, I'd just like to highlight a quick piece of housekeeping. As I mentioned, we've changed to the Zoom platform now for our webinars, and so I'll be brief. I know everyone's become an expert in Zoom over the last 6 months. There are over 1,000 of you joining us today from a host of different countries and exciting brands, such as T-Mobile, Expedia, the Houston Astros we have in the house as well, Wells Fargo and Siemens, and the list really does go on and on. It's really exciting to have you all joining us today. As such, please do let us know using the chat function or the Q&A function that you should see at the toolbar at the bottom of your screens if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to our panel today, or any feedback or opinions that you have. All of this interaction is welcomed, and we will be sure to incorporate it throughout the webinar. Finally, today's webinar will be recorded. So if you would like to watch me give this speech again, or you'd like to revisit some of the discussion today, please do keep an eye out for your inboxes over the next couple of days. But that's enough from me. I'll hand it over to you, Nicholas, and you can dive into this great discussion.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. And thanks again for everybody for attending today, and looking forward to this great discussion with this fantastic panel of experts that we have. Humbled even to be involved with y'all. Let's jump right in, and we'll start with Donald at Twitter. The topic today is quality assurance and QA and perfection of all of the processes and so forth. QA, of course, gets a bit of a bad rep because a lot of times it's seen as taskmaster and, you know, you did this wrong, and nitpicking and picking at things that folks are getting wrong. But y'all at Twitter are kind of taking a different approach to QA, and it's more of an affirmation type of a thing, what people are getting right and how people can improve the work that they're doing. Tell us a little bit more about how you're taking that approach and the impact it's had for you all there.
Appreciate the question, Nicholas. And again, just want to say, you know, just hello to everyone who's on the call. I think it's a really, really good question, and it's a different approach that we're taking here at Twitter. To your point, what we have found and come up against when we talk about quality assurance is the sort of traditional understanding of critical error. and sort of measuring agents based on that. And we, I think over the last, let's say 12 to 18 months, have been deliberate in shifting our attention to more of a comprehensive idea of what's the overall customer experience like, and how do we empower agents and give affirmation to agents that throughout the entire cycle for that consumer experience, that it's one that, you know, they have a part to play in, and that we measure their performance against. And so, you know, just moving out of the conversation around, did you make a critical error on that action you took on a particular case? And more importantly, now focusing our time on every step in that journey, starting with how did the customer who had the issue engage with us? How did they find us? What channel did they use? Through to, was the policy effective? Like, you know, helping the agents to provide that feedback around the efficacy of the policy. Third is then also looking at and talking with agents around, you know, the workflows that they deal with on a day-to-day basis, and they focus on from a speed perspective. What's the cognitive load? Like, are the workflows, are the processes that we put in place for the agents to use to actually action a case, are they too complex, which will lead to more what we classically call critical errors? And I think lastly, then looking at, you can get all of those things right, but then from our perspective, maybe send out the wrong message to the customer, or don't follow up with the customer. And that then drives a poor satisfaction rating. And so what we try to do, Nicholas, is bring all those things together and help agents, empower agents to be able to speak out on every one of those steps in the process about how they can improve. And I think it's quite frankly been, you know, providing a big ROI for us.
Yeah, so Donald, I guess it's more of a holistic approach, and rather than just there's this, that, and the other little specific detail, it's more of an end-to-end. How did our customers, you know, how did they take this entire interaction, right?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, the customer doesn't see behind the scenes all of the sort of nuance in the steps that are taken. And we want to really bring that to life for agents and for the people internal to Twitter, so that everyone sort of gets an understanding of how complex and how comprehensive a decisioning point is and the work that the agents do. And I think we have found, Nicholas, that it's provided a huge amount of empowerment and excitement to our agents, that they can be that voice of the agent back internally into Twitter about what's working and what's not.
Yeah, certainly a more engaging, more holistic approach that I suppose your agents even have more buy-in, that they're part of the process as well, right? Rather than just they're ticking boxes.
Yeah, you know, moving out of that world of just ticking boxes, people sitting at a terminal, a dummy station, and just plowing through cases, and instead involving them into the process, making them feel more connected to what we do here at Twitter, which is we're mission driven, we're purposely led, and having our agents is no other sort of secret sauce than to have our agents feel like they're a part of that process and they understand the purpose as well. And this is just a small sort of expression of making that happen.
Yeah, you bet. Let's bring some other folks in here. Doug, over at ESPN, where you're the big shot when it comes to customer and fan engagement. Tell us a little bit about how that might work for you all too. I mean, you getting away from more of that, you know, that nitnoid little ticking boxes and getting more into a more engaged experience with your agents as well. Tell us what your thoughts are on this.
Absolutely. We agree 100%. Donald, spot on. I support that sentiment. You know, we look at it this way: when you're in customer service, you are actually the only team, the only agent. You speak to the fan on their terms. They're reaching out to you. It's not the other way around. So it's not like you're a marketer doing a survey and getting a vibe or a pulse from the customer, or what we call the fan. You're hearing directly from the customer, and that is the golden egg. So we believe heavily in CSAT scoring. And every month we produce a high quality production newsletter called Great Responses. And it really showcases the best CSAT reviews of the month and reveals exactly how our nominated agents drove the conversation to a level of success. And we always try to share that secret sauce, as Donald pointed out, of our best agents, and show every agent that they can do exactly the same thing. And by the way, here's how, step by step. So it's never anything where a manager should feel uncomfortable bringing a feedback back to an agent. when the fan reports back to us and says what the experience was like, we have the ability, and I think everyone does, to compare that experience to one that might have been, let's say, a 5-star review, and share those best practices about how did this agent remove obstacles and conditions and assist thus all agents to achieve them. Because look, we need to give logical, repeatable processes for our agents to be successful. And if you give them that secret sauce through effective CSAT reviews, then quality assurance becomes really easy. So it's never a point where you're really coming after with a stick the agent. It's always a carrot.
Yeah, Doug, I love the approach that you're taking there, where it's not just this one way. You know, you're just going out. It's when you're interacting with that customer, with that fan in ESPN's existence, that's contacting you. There has to be that give and take, and that can be challenging if your life, thanks to QA, if what you think of it is just this list of checkboxes, right? And so it's also bringing that same sort of quality to how we're interacting and giving, you know, those best practices and these lessons learned that you're alluding to here, so that everybody learns from everybody else's experience, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Colin, let's talk about Freshly a little bit. How are you all leveraging that sort of approach?
Yeah, I mean, we have, firstly, I agree with everything everyone has said, and agree that it's really important to have a robust QA program that goes beyond just the clerical particulars, you may say. We really put a lot of investment up front in a more robust QA program, even very early at my time at Freshly, when we only had about maybe 6 or 7 people or so. But just knowing that you really have to start building a concept of quality very early in an organization before bad habits start to seep in, because it's very difficult to plop a quality assurance structure on top of a larger organization when people have kind of already spread their wings and they've started their own bad practices. And then you're trying to kind of herd everyone back into a predefined area. So that's very difficult to do. So I would encourage people to think about quality assurance very early in the existence of your customer support organization, even if at the time it may seem too early or even superfluous. One thing that we did is really have an understanding about what quality means, because it's one of those things that it's very easy to devolve into cliches about what is a great customer service experience. So we really did a thought exercise where we broke down quality customer service for our customers into 5 different pillars. Then we broke those down even further, and we said, what are the component parts of those pillars? So one example of a pillar, which of course is a big component of any quality assurance program, I would say, is the idea of empathy. But empathy is very amorphous, and you really need to define what that means and how agents can show empathy. So we broke that down into different components in a series of yes/no questions to guide our QA specialists. An example of that would be empathy is using the customer's first name. So we have certain standards as you have to say the customer's first name early in the conversation. So that's a way to show empathy and connection. And if a customer mentions a personal life event, just tangentially while they're talking with you about maybe they're getting married next month or something like that, we expect an agent to acknowledge that. So trying to really understand what do these different component parts of a great quality experience mean, and then breaking those down further. So you take these things that are kind of qualitative intangibles and you make it more tangible. And then you can start to put numbers behind it through a scoring system. And you kind of get the best of both worlds. So you get the qualitative aspect of things, but you also get it in a way that allows for reporting and then allows for you to cross-reference that data that you accumulate with other areas of your business, like satisfaction scores or efficiency figures. And through that interaction, you can learn a lot about how you can improve the overall operations in your organization.
It's an interesting perspective, Colin, and I think I hear Donald and Doug also talking about this, trying to bring quality to those somewhat harder to quantify things, and finding a way to count it up and making it tangible in such a way that you can actually gauge how good an interaction was, even on these sorts of, we call them touchy-feely, but really that's what people are trying to get when they're interacting with you in your contact center, or if it's support and service that they're looking for, right?
Yeah, most certainly. I think really the benefit of the quality assurance program too is to also make sure that you're encompassing certain areas that could be even beyond what the customer actually experienced. So one of the things that we encountered is the fact that we know there are certain areas of our business, of our company, that can be confusing to customers just because of the nature of the space we're in. So we're a healthy prepared meals company at Freshly. And we're kind of different from other meal kit services. So we have customers who come in with preconceptions that are wrong. about how to go about managing their order or their subscription or something. So we know there are certain areas where there's customer confusion. And rather than just rating a contact on the face of it in terms of did the agent do X, Y, and Z, we also have certain standards for agents, knowing there are certain areas of confusion that we expect the agent to be able to read between the lines and proactively supply certain pieces of information to a customer. So if there are areas that we know that you're a new customer and we want to make sure that you're reminded of X, Y, and Z to make your experience better so you're not caught by surprise by something, then we incorporate those in our standards too. And that's also one of our pillars in quality assurance, that we want agents to be very mindful of what customers need to know above and beyond the actual conversation they're having, because we know that's better for customer service and we know that makes for a better journey for the customer, whether the customer has any idea or not when they're having that conversation.
Yeah, you bet, Colin. I mean, when we think about the processes that we have in our organizations, we're so used to it because we're the experts. We own and run and use this business all the time, but our customers don't necessarily know that, right? And so integrating this type of empathy into, okay, outside of our box, outside of our four walls, people aren't going to be familiar with our processes. So how do we build into our QA structures and procedures a way to integrate that empathy and make sure that we're projecting that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Good. So let's talk about QA and let's talk about Playvox. Emily, we were talking a bit earlier about what QA is and how it works and what Playvox does for their customers. I coined this, it's like meta QA. It's putting structure around QA. You wouldn't think that quality assurance is something that needed structure, but of course everything needs structure. And this is kind of putting structure on that function that's supposed to provide structure for the entire organization. Tell us a little bit about how Playvox helps empower their customers and how they will use your technology.
Yeah, so Playvox focuses on really improving that overall agent experience. So just as Donald, Colin, and Doug were talking about, right? We offer an agent optimization, a suite of tools to help do that. They all complement each other with, again, that focus and that agent first mentality. So contact centers measure quality, but then what? What do you do with all those quality scores and how can they actually change and impact your business? So quality is great to diagnose and get a benchmark, but it's all those pieces that come after quality, after all those evaluations, that actually have direct ROI on your business. So being able to coach efficiently and effectively, measuring performance, continuous learning paths and courses, and of course the voice of the customer, right? Making that customer feedback and loop, bringing it all together and kind of tying that back to the agent. Quality, kind of like I said, helps diagnose, but all those pieces truly help treat, reiterate, and improve that agent experience. So we really work to empower the agents with tools to help them within their role. And in turn, that correlates directly to an improvement in the overall customer experience as well.
Yeah, Emily, it's kind of something that a little saying that I like to share with my clients, and it has to do with what you're talking about with the voice of the customer. And surely QA falls into the same sort of category. If all you're doing is taking a look at the data and the information and the insights that you get from it and say reporting it or comparing it to how you did last month or last week or last quarter, and you're not doing something with it, it's kind of like the weather, right? The people will talk about it and it'll impact you, but nobody does anything about it, right? So it's putting it in such a framework and a format that you can actually take action on it and improve the things that you do. Otherwise, it's just sitting up there on a slide for your leadership team to say, this is where we are and this is how we're doing, right?
Right. Recognition and coaching are a big piece of, that will complement that QA process. So you might hear me talk a lot about coaching because a coaching center or contact center with a strong coaching program, they'll have better CSAT, they'll have better NPS, and in turn, lower agent churn. So there are so many measurable pieces of data that show the impact that coaching can have on an agent team. So creating a consistent process allows you to continue to aid in those positives, as we were just talking about, right? Focusing on success versus errors and
Yep.
getting agents to that end desired goal.
Okay. Yeah, great. Now, Doug, at ESPN, you guys are leveraging a BPO that has actually implemented this Playvox approach. Tell us a little bit about that experience and how it is that you're making it into a more robust QA experience rather than, like we've been saying so far, just ticking boxes and comparing scores and so forth.
Yeah, Playvox, and when I was asked to join this panel, I didn't know that Playvox or Emily would be a part of it. So
It's kismet.
it's Kismet, and we believe in the product. We use it frequently. Case in point, we are now work at home. We used to be working in a center, and sports are all about being enjoyed in groups, right? You love your team because they're yours, and you love your team because of, and your favorite players because of a history that you have with them and experience. And you talk about it with fans, friends, family, etc. And there's passion. It's all emotion. It's really a social experience where fans talk about things, discuss and debate during after games, etc. Our agents did the same things in a center, and now they're all remote. So we're kind of tasked with reproducing that environment virtually. And Playvox is our basis for that. We have a centralized location now where our agents who have to learn fantasy sports, because it's fantasy football season, and it's not easy to learn fantasy football. That's 2 weeks of hardcore training. And when it comes to AI, we can talk about that in a bit, maybe later. But when it comes to motivating our agents, they're playing actively fantasy games weekly on Playvox for prizes, because you need to play fantasy to know fantasy. And you want to win the rings. There you go. You got to make sure that you understand it. So we use Playvox for a collaborative environment. We have virtual chat rooms on Playvox for collaborative fandom, like the Black Hole for our agents who happen to be Raiders fans, the Dog Pound for agents who are Browns fans. And all of this is where they feel comfortable asking questions, having smack talk, and also it's linked to a karma store, where in fact the agents can earn points based on their quality CSAT reviews and use those points to redeem all sorts of sports-themed items such as autographed helmets, jerseys, tailgate gear, pizza delivery, and time off if they've worked overtime. So it's really like what Emily said, recognition and coaching that we do on this platform. Because look, it's 3 legs of a satisfied agent: pay, people, and feeling valued and challenged. Pay, one thing, but if you're not in a center with your people, feel like you are virtually. And feeling valued and challenged can be done on Playvox because you're feeling valued by how we work with karma to give back to you, and you're challenged because you're always engaged with your fellow fans and you're learning the product almost through gamification for us, if you will. So it's a wonderful platform that we found great success with.
Yeah, and it's good even that you recognize the need to do that with everybody working from home to try to replicate that camaraderie and that team feel that's going on right there. I mean, almost literally team feel, right? Considering
Absolutely.
Sports Center. Yeah, you bet. Colin, y'all at Freshly are also a client of Playvox. And I know that when you and I were speaking earlier, you were talking about the challenge of sharing feedback and coaching. Emily speaks a lot about coaching. Doug was just talking about coaching as well. Tell us a little bit about that, how you're trying to drive standards even in the use of coaching itself.
Yes, most certainly. One of the challenges that we've had really over the past 3 years or so is the fact that our customer support organization has been very geographically dispersed, you might say. So we started off in one location in the New York City area, and then we moved out to Arizona, then we opened up a small area in Maryland, and then we went abroad in various degrees, and now we have 2 offices in the Philippines. So we have about 5 locations all in all. And then we have some people within those locations, of course, everyone now, but even prior to COVID, we had people who were working remotely. So for the past few years, we've embraced the challenge of how do we knit all these people together into a single team? And how do we have visibility into the types of leaders we're developing within our organization when they're not sitting right next to us? And this was especially mindful when we expanded abroad a year and a half ago, which was the first time we went outside the US. And we wanted to make sure that we had quality control over the types of conversations that leaders were having with agents. We really had spent a lot of time in the US building up a culture of coaching and mentorship as opposed to finger wagging. And we wanted to make sure that when we went abroad, we took the culture that we had internally in the US and were able to transplant that abroad. So our agents abroad are basically treated the exact same way as our agents in the US. And one of the challenges, we don't have insight into the conversations that supervisors are having with their direct reports. So Playvox has been very helpful in adding structure around that. There are a series of coaching cards, which we use for everything from weekly one-on-ones to monthly conversations that review KPIs, and also for more sporadic types of things, like if there's a disciplinary issue, a behavioral issue, or a specific performance issue, or a coaching issue with quality assurance. So both sporadic sorts of things, situational, but also for these regular weekly conversations that leaders are having. And the coaching cards provide structure around the types of conversations leaders have. There are certain areas they have to fill out. There are certain questions they have to answer. The leaders are supposed to fill that out when they have the conversation with the agent. These coaching cards are readily available to everyone in senior leadership, so I can go at any given time and look at these different conversations and see what sort of conversations was this supervisor having with their direct reports. So it's not only allowed us to provide more structure around what we want leaders to talk about in those conversations, but it allows us visibility into what sort of content is happening in those conversations, and just gives us just a lot of visibility that otherwise we would lack, because we're dealing with people who are thousands and thousands of miles away.
Yeah. I love that you're using the word, because you pinged on it and it hit my head right away when you said structure, because when we're talking about QA, a lot of times that's what the whole idea is, and making sure that things are relatively standardized, that people are getting that same experience. And I suppose what a lot of people don't necessarily think of is that there's a value, there's use for adding structure to those interpersonal interactions, right? Like coaching and so forth. You might not think of it because you think that's more, like I said, kind of a touchy-feely thing, but why not apply some sort of structure there, right?
Yeah, most certainly. And I think the key lesson there too is, and we've seen this in various aspects throughout customer experience at Freshly, and most notably in some experiments we did with some BPOs outside the Philippines, that one of the challenges that you really appreciate is if you don't have good leaders on the ground who know how to talk to their agents and make them feel valued, and also are able to guide them towards greater heights of excellence, then you really have robbed your organization of the ability to prosper. And we've had circumstances where we were working with partners where they just didn't have that sort of coaching culture. So that's one of the reasons why we knew that internally it's important for us to be able to define what our standards are. So it all starts with what your internal standards are, and then how can you create a structure that allows those standards to be duplicated across different aspects of your organization, and that allows visibility into those to make sure that leaders are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's been very, very successful for us to maintain high confidence that the types of leadership that our agents are getting abroad and even within the US is what we expect it to be.
Yeah, just like any other aspect of a successful organization, the leaders need coaching and the leaders need that development as well. And of course, that's going to take some sort of structure, as you were saying. I want to ask Donald about this at Twitter, but first I want to take the opportunity to thank Diana for the question. Colin, while I still have you here, she's talking about how you outlined empathy as one of the QA pillars. There are 5. She's wondering what the other 4 are. Are you at liberty to share those, or do you have a link or something that you can share with the group here?
Sure. Because I don't have a link, I'd be happy to connect on LinkedIn if you want to find me. But yeah, the pillars we have, 5 pillars are, and they spell an acronym because we wanted to brand the.
Because it has to, yes, every time.
So it's CPRO, so it's CEPRO. So C stands for clear, and that's broadly speaking, making sure that you understand what the customer is asking, and also making sure when you're communicating back with the customer, you're doing it in a succinct way, free of jargon that the customer can understand. The E stands for empathetic, which is what I had talked about previously. The P stands for professional. So that's where we house more of the more traditional administrative types of concerns. So if you're on the phone, what's the best practice where you ask permission before you put someone on hold, and for emails and texts and chats, spelling and grammar and syntax and that sort of stuff. The R stands for rational, which has to do with both how you explain something. So making sure that you don't just quote policy at people, but you can explain why something is the way it is, and also how you frame issues. So framing issues as aspirationally and positively as possible. The O, the last one, stands for outgoing, which is where we house that proactivity concept I mentioned, where there are certain standards we expect that agents will introduce pieces of information even if the customer didn't ask, and also making sure that we have a way to rate agents if they promise they would do X, Y, and Z and they don't. So that's that final pillar.
Awesome. Thanks, Colin. Now, Donald, maybe Twitter doesn't have a 5-pillar acronym like they do at Freshly, but share your thoughts on this concept of applying this structure around the coaching aspect of what you're intending for your supervisors to do as they're developing their teams for that better customer experience.
I think it's the idea of standardizing this approach is one that I think we lean into here as well at Twitter. I think a lot of what Colin said, quite honestly, resonated. I was learning. Colin, I took down those 5 things. I think that was incredible. What I would say, Nicholas, is, in hearing that question is, it comes down to for us, it comes down to a couple of things. Obviously, coaching and support is supremely important for the work that we do here at Twitter because of the type of work and the type of things that we deal with. I often tell people sometimes we see the best and the worst of society. And so having the ability having the leaders that are confident enough to coach agents how to deal with that and to deal in different circumstances has been incredibly important for us. And so a couple of things come to my mind when I think about this idea of coaching and support and standardizing it all. I think some of the ROI that you get off of it, obviously the point around, just improving the conversations in the groups and helping us to be better, because we also are a very decentralized organization and becoming even more so. And so having that ability to coach and support and teach on the fly only helps to fuel and support this idea of decentralization. I think the second thing that comes to my mind around this coaching and support for us and why it's so important is this idea of mental health and support. And so, for our agents who are dealing with cases by which they may get it right or they may get it wrong, and in either case, they're dealing with and carrying that sort of baggage of the decisions that they're making, having leaders that have been trained to coach and to train to spot these things out and to, and sometimes encourage, agents and sometimes, sort of help them through difficult situations has been, again, incredibly important for our organization and we see that from an ROI standpoint in terms of the attrition and the low amount of attrition. We've seen that in the high positivity scores around people in their mental health. So for sure, coaching and support from a model by which we're decentralized is something that it has to be a pillar for us.
Yeah, I hear a couple of things ping off of that, Donald. First of all, how important it is to keep in mind the that human aspect of it. I mean, everything is going so crazy, right? This is the year that we're always going to look back and just 2020, and this is where we are, and this is how it's happening. And it's not simply about, again, ticking through those boxes and getting this, that, and the other thing accomplished. It's about that empathy. It's about that human factor as well. And you talk about an ROI, right? Making sure that your team is operating, functioning properly, and everybody's in a good mental space for this. It's so vital, right? But let's give our team leaders the opportunity and the tools to put some structure around it so they know what to do, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that they know what to do. Like take, for example, to your point, like what has happened with the COVID pandemic situation. And if we didn't, if we didn't invest and sort of standardized approaches to helping our QA leads to train and to support a workforce that overnight went from working in a centralized manner to being distributed. If we didn't invest that time and energy into building the best and brightest sort of leadership group, who's to say where we would be? And for us as an organization, overnight, we became paralyzed. We had to transition from a centralized to a decentralized work model. And, I don't sort of mince words when I say, if it wasn't for our quality assurance leads on the ground, sort of helping individuals who are in their homes in Manila and some of our other locations, I don't think we could have pulled it off in short order as we did.
Yeah, and Doug, I see you nodding there too, because that kind of brings the topic you were discussing a little bit earlier back into the fold as well, which is you don't have that, hey, yell to your supervisor over your shoulder dynamic anymore, right? I want to also talk about something else that you pinged on that I want to steal your thunder, your awesome Matrix reference that you made, but this idea that you can leverage AI and your knowledge base in ways to give you the answer to what's going on, but you could also leverage that same approach, the AI and the knowledge that exists out there for even the how to interact, the softer side, if you will. Tell us a little bit more your thoughts on that, and don't forget to mention how the matrix works. That's a great
Sure.
example.
Thank you for that. So the Matrix example, I got to switch it because I work for Disney, but I'll start with the Matrix. So with the Matrix, the scene where Trinity needs to learn how to fly a helicopter, and she just loads it up to her head and boom, she knows what to do. The key is this. We had somebody from the audience ask a question, how to train customer care people who don't come from necessarily the customer care background or have certainly any experience in servicing what we do. So for example, we have a lot of people who are sports fans, but they don't know fantasy sports. And there's a lot of rules that you need to understand for fantasy football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and the requirements of the Fantasy Sports Trade Association. It's enough just your head could explode. So how do you get these folks up to speed and make sure that we have their best interests at heart? So we have a tool, it's more like an R2 unit that sits in the back of an X-Wing fighter that tries to help you. And while R2 likes to make a lot of bleepy noises, R2's there for a reason, to kind of help you fly the X-Wing. Our veteran agents don't need that R2 unit, but our newbies, after 2 weeks of training, they still do. So our busiest time of year is really late August through October, right? So with fantasy sports, fantasy football, fantasy baseball still going on. We got the NFL, college football, baseball, and this year with the NBA. So we're dealing with a lot of live content all day, every day. So what my agents need to do is triage issues in the moment. And it's daunting. So fans need this in the moment support. And beyond our chatbots and other tools, which are dealing with the low hanging fruit of fan contact inquiries. And if I could also answer, one of the audience also said, how do you deal with CSAT with your chatbots? With my chatbot, no matter how elegant, Bot Van Pelt, which emulates Scott Van Pelt, our true talent, so we call our bot Van Pelt. Bot Van Pelt never does great on CSAT, never. Bots are only meant to do what they do, and they don't take themselves too seriously, at least ours doesn't. So it's really up to the agent. And so with that, we ramp up our new hires after 2 solid weeks of training to handle the complex issues. So we use AI tooling that rapidly analyzes the fan's conversational words by the recency, frequency, sentiment, and velocity of what the fan is saying, the customer is saying. So we're predicting the sentiment of the fan conversation using rake, rapid analysis of keyword extraction in real time. We uncover the source of their issue, and we provide, the system that we're using provides a freshly baked response to our new agents, and it swoops in our CRM as a recommended response for phone, for chat, for SMS, for social, in the moment. The agent can choose to use it, and the newbies often do because they honestly aren't sure of the right answer, and they round the edges and make it their own. And we know this works because they're based on what other agents have said recently regarding similar issues or the same exact issues. And the system only pushes the conversational responses that received positive CSAT from fellow fans. So we know what they're getting has a stamp of approval from the customer, because not only did it work, but the fans seemed to like it because I gave them a 5-star review out of 5. So we do a lot of that. And so that's kind of how we're using the AI.
That's awesome, Doug. What a great example. And just so that it's clear that this isn't just the information, it's going into the sentiment analysis, it's going to the word choice. And if I were the first, believe me, I don't know anything about all this fantasy stuff. To me, all the sports are fantasy this year anyway, right? If I were called upon to answer any of these questions, well, I'd rely not just on what's the answer, but how do I even interact, right? And it's that comprehensive, right?
Absolutely. You're dealing with a league commissioner who's terrified because he or she made incorrect playoff settings. And they're really nervous because they have 9 of their best friends saying, "What did you do?" And you have a new agent that has to handle this and make a custom change. They can elegantly explain it through what other agents have said before, just as elegantly. And then once they become familiar with it, great, they can make it their own. But in the beginning, we're giving them verbiage that has worked, not just scripting, but verbiage that has worked in the past. And so they can then say, it worked for Jim or for Jane, it could work for me. And that's it.
Do you know what I'd like to go around the horn with a question on that you kind of make me think of here, Doug, and it goes to some of these questions that are coming up. And thanks to everybody who's continuing to add questions in here. Please go ahead and ask in the question and answer box here. But I kind of want to go around. We're talking about leveraging this AI, talking about leveraging these best practices. Really, it's kind of a QA thing, right? To give us not just an idea of what the answer should be, but how we should apply it and how we can interact with people who are calling in that need our help in the contact center. So I'm wondering, what do you think, and just real quick around the horn here, what do you think is the future of finding a way to leverage this with those bots so that maybe they can be more engaging? Because, I have the same experience, not necessarily with your bot, Doug, but they're just not good. Well, if we can leverage that for people, why can't we leverage it for the bots as well? Doug, we'll hit you first, and then we'll go around with everybody here. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you suppose is coming up, and how can we do that?
Yeah, we're dealing with it right now. It's so challenging. I mean, I think my bots they're elegant, they're funky, they're cool. They're all dressed up as last year's winners. So our fantasy football chatbot looks like is dressed in the gear of the Kansas City Chiefs. And basically, it deals with low-hanging fruit questions, password resets, account information, simple triage. Because the more detailed stuff where I have to deal with verbal identification of the fan, and I'm dealing with PII, and Disney's lawyers and myself agreed, we'd rather a live human deal with that than the bot. So because the bot can only deal with low-hanging fruit questions, it never gets great reviews, but it's analyzing sentiment as well, and it's getting more natural sounding, but it's still a challenge. I don't know the magic bullet on making AI more elegant so it can replace a human. I don't want it to, because it's the human that represents the brand that is really the specialist.
Yeah, maybe it's more fundamental than that anyway, because as you said, and of course, I think everybody will share the sentiment that the idea of these bots should really be pushing that simple, more straightforward solution to the bots. But what the trick is a lot of times is, how do I get out of the bot? Right? It's that recognition that this is something that needs to be escalated to a human being, and then the simple transition, and maybe that's the better use for it anyway. Let's go ahead and check it out. Colin, what are your thoughts on this as well?
Sure. Yeah, I entirely agree with what you both were saying in regards to the fact that really the purpose of bots is to free up time so that human beings can be better utilized, especially for things like empathy or more involved conversations that require more creative problem solving. And in my experience, I think the key thing with using bots not only is being able to define what can a bot best handle. So what is, basic lower level questions that don't involve much nuance, that come in at volumes that inhibit your ability to respond to other customers in a fast manner. And that's kind of the good criteria for a good bot territory, where it's worth the investment put in it, because the volume that the bot's going to deal with is high enough, but you're also not inching into territory where you're dealing with creative problem solving and empathy, and you're overutilizing a bot or forcing customers to interact with it. And I say another important component is also you really have to understand the value of the conversations you're having with customers before you start to use a bot too expansively, because you really have to define what are superfluous conversations, and you have to kind of be careful how you define that. So, because you could have conversations that deal with very low level pieces of information, like basic questions about your business, but those could also be an entry point for being able to upsell or being able to create a more involved relationship with a customer early in their experience with a company. So you really need to have an understanding of, with the various conversations you're having with customers, trying to bucket those into what is the ROI that you're getting from those, and linking those to the retention of customers. So, because if you don't have that understanding of what you're getting out of different types of conversations, then it's hard to know where you can position a bot. So that's kind of my main word of caution there. That's kind of a prerequisite to have a better understanding of what you're getting from the conversations you're currently having with human beings.
Yeah. And surely it's an aspirational goal to use your bots for upselling, I suppose, right? That's not coming anytime soon, right? Donald, let's hear your thoughts on this and the automation and how do we handle either the trade-off or something maybe more straightforward, which is identifying what's right for the bot and what needs to go to a person.
I share a similar sentiment with Colin and Doug in terms of sort of the idea and the spirit around a bot and how effective it can be if used in the right way. I think while we don't use a bot in that way, a chatbot, for example, here at Twitter, it's because we're moving to that sort of stage, but we want to do it in a very thoughtful way. And I think what Colin called out, I think is spot on to some of the thinking that we have, which is, where can we use a bot where it's high volume but low complexity, not a lot of nuance. And then for us, that translates into certain things that you see users reach out to Twitter on, like, need to change my password, which is pretty classic, or, I need to change my handle. Those are things that I think we initially high amounts of volume, sort of low transactional risk there. And so, we want to, as we begin to launch out these types of bots, we want to, begin to have a focus on those types of workflows for us. I think the idea of using bots as another mode is one that we definitely believe in. It's just going to be, can we get the recipe right and not sort of degrade the relationship or the experience that a customer has with us? And that's paramount for us.
Yeah. And I guess there's probably more going on than simply what the issue is and what the situation and why somebody's contacting you in the first place. I know that especially with Twitter, you were saying recently that there are different types of customers, there are different segments and there are different personas, and surely that's going to play a role whether or not that person who might otherwise self-help with a bot is going to go right actually to a live agent, right? Because of not just what the issue might be, but the stature or whatnot of the person who's contacting, right?
Yeah, that's when it gets really exciting for us and some of the sort of our thought process. Chrissy Teigen, or just name your star. Most of the public figures obviously are using Twitter, which we are excited about. Please keep using us. But we have to really be cautious and think think about, do we want to handhold or create a white glove service for that type of a public figure versus someone who may not necessarily as a user want to engage with an agent, and sort of finding that right recipe in that mix is sort of what we're exploring today. For us, customers want to get in, they want to get out, they want their questions answered. But in particular regions, there's clearly a little bit more care that's needed. For particular customers, there's a lot more care that's needed. And so, the idea of adding a bot there clearly probably wouldn't be the best thing for us, but finding that right recipe is where we're headed over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts there trying to make that decision, how you're going to engage the customer in the first place. Yeah. Emily, talking about QA, talking about using bots and all this information. I'd like to your thoughts on this part of the conversation too, but I also want to transition to how it is that folks are leveraging Playbox and this type of technology also for enhancing how the agents are empathizing as well. There's that really cool aspect that once you get to the person, it's this person is influenced and educated on how to interact as well, not just what the answer is.
Yeah, so I mean, the important thing with thinking about you using bots and using this self-service automation is that what does it leave? It leaves the really complex interactions for the agents, and
right.
that actually is a good thing because it leaves them more challenging things to solve, and it's making those personalized experiences better for the customer, and also lessening the repetitiveness of that agent job as well. So when we look at AI, kind of that blended approach, and I think kind of Doug hit on it there of AI plus humans. How can you take advantage of the technology, but then keep that human element in the mix? So being able to automatically tag interaction for a quality review, right, based on a combination of things like customer sentiment, length of interaction, type of channel or inquiry. That's where I think you can really use automation and kind of carry that through, automatically assign a learning course or a coaching template as Colin mentioned, based on a QA score. Again, kind of that positive, providing that automatic recognition for an agent based on some type of modeling of what an excellent QA score would look like. So there's components that can kind of be used within that AI space on the back end, on the agent desktop, as well as kind of that self-service model as well. When we look at empathizing with customers, so that is couldn't be more relevant than today, right? So agent experience, as we've all been talking, has a direct impact on the customer experience. So we like to put it really easy. So the concept of AX equals CX, agent experience equals customer experience. So many of our customers have seasonality and different marketplace trends that are going to drive, Colin kind of talked about some of their business pillars and strategies, and the entire organization needs to adapt. And that means the quality process as well. So, one thing is your scorecard should not be static. So if you have not changed your quality scorecards, even in the smallest capacity in 2020, here's an opportunity to review this. So measuring agents and creating those metrics around your business drivers really helps agents prioritize their efforts, right? And kind of drives that strategy from the top down. So it permeates all the way down to that agent level. So, kind of as an example, we have a lot of customers who have added empathy related questions and put empathy related metrics in place for their agents. So that's part of their quality process, part of the scorecard. So it was a huge trend we're seeing. We actually wrote a blog tip. Colin mentioned, referencing the customer by name, right? There's a whole bunch of just very, very small things you can do that really drive the empathy of that interaction. It's just becoming so relevant for our customers. So when you're looking at kind of that overarching, those business drivers, if it's an important driver for your company in this season, you should definitely incorporate that into the quality process. And again, empathy is one that we're seeing a lot of right now.
Yeah, Emily, I really like that perspective. Again, it's a different type of meta QA, right? And that you should continually be looking for what the next thing is for improving what your QA is. And like you say, if it's static, if this is the same stuff, if you will, that we were gauging our goodness on last year, I mean, this is a great year to use as an example for that. If we're still measuring the same thing that we were measuring last September, we're off the boat, right? We've missed it completely. And in that sense, that's an incentive to continually be looking for that improvement, because that's what QA is all about, is continuous improvement, right?
Right. The agents, they want to know that. They want to know those business drivers. Donald talked about it at the very beginning, being able to be part of that strategy, right? What's important to an organization, and what are the changes that are driving it? 2020 or 2019, there's business changes that are happening, right? And there's going to be more that come in 2020, and they want to be part of that overarching strategy. So putting tangible metrics in the quality, the evaluations, and the scorecards, there's no better place but to say, this is our strategy, and this is how we're measuring our business, again, from kind of the top down.
Yeah, it's that clarity again. Going back to Colin's acronym, one of those is CLEAR, right? You got to make sure that everybody understands where you're going from, right? I want to get to a couple more questions that we have here online. Folks are asking in the last few minutes here. Ted is asking about going beyond the agent-customer interaction. Like to get the panel's perspective on how they incorporate risk factors. And I know, Doug, you were talking a little bit about PII, and Donald, surely in the Twitter sphere, as they say, there's a lot going on about, we call it regulation, but even internally we have rules about what we do and we don't allow to get out there into the ecosystem, and how do we follow our own rules. So let's go around again around the room here, and let's talk about that. Doug, started with you. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you balance that standardization and care for example, customers' private information, while at the same time emphasizing how important it is to be empathetic and have that human touch?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're two distinctly different elements. Having empathy in what we call the FEGs, the fan experience guidelines of how we always speak to somebody. And when you're dealing with sports fan, we always are able to offer a +1, something that excites them at the end of the conversation, because fan to fan, again, you have to pass a sports test to work for basic sports tests, to work for ESPN customer service, but you have to be a passionate fan of some sport or a player, it doesn't matter. And so you're able to have that fan-to-fan conversation, but understand that you still have to recognize in our experience guidelines, we have to identify PII. We have things like CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, there is elements of, the US is slowly experiencing what Europe is right to be forgotten. We're going to have state upon state where certain processes must be followed by care agents, and yet they're kind of rigid, but we're going to have to include those, but always with an element of empathy. And I feel blessed that I work in the world of sports, because again, sports are based on emotion. And so if we're able to have, hey, one sports fan speaking to another, I can still go through my required flow of my guidelines, my processes, but I'm able to still have a conversation with you that gets the fact that, hey, you're an unloved Jets fan that's, dealing with a team that's 0-2 and likely not to have the best season this year that you were hoping for, but I feel you. So empathy is where we will keep you as a fan of ESPN. We can relate to you, but we must understand that it's only getting more intense with regards to policy and expectations on those requirements.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate, as the Colorado Rockies are 14 games behind currently as things are going. So, Colin, y'all deliver food, for crying out loud. There's certainly going to be rules and regulations and policies and procedures that you followed to keep your customers safe, right? You're balancing that with also, on the other hand, people are taking in food, which is a personal thing as well. So you've got that blend also of following the rules rigidly, making sure things are done properly, while at the same time connecting with your customers, right?
Yeah, most certainly. And I would say the key thing for us anytime it involves factors of risk is to embed those as much as you can in an infrastructure. Because one thing that just gets too dicey is having to rely on kind of agents in the moment manually processing what they should or should not do with something. So as much as we can, as we built up different types of infrastructure, be it technical or procedural, we've built those risk measures into it. So an example is with the chatbot we have on our site. It's programmed in such a way that if you mention something which could be related to like a food safety issue as an example, so you mention illness or something like that, then the bot will immediately transfer you to an agent. So that's kind of built in the bot's infrastructure. And similarly, when like COVID hit, as an example, we had a lot of customers asking much more detailed questions about how we could ensure the safety of our customers and the different practices that we were using on the ground and so forth. Where trying to get that to an agent where they may not have as much specialty knowledge and they may not be able to communicate our standards as fully as we would like. So we made sure we built into our CRM that those contacts would go off to a special group of agents in our food safety team. And similarly, having a lot of other procedures that involve routing procedures and things of that nature. So that's really how we try to accommodate that and build as much as we can into a technical infrastructure. So it's not something that really the frontline agent doesn't even have to think much about. And then complement that with just a lot of training and awareness, because a lot of it is just making sure people are aware of where there could be risks and issues of that sort. So agents are just mindful as much as possible.
Yeah, there's a paradox sometimes in there too when you're dealing with people, that if we're given enough structure and solid walls built around us in certain aspects, that frees us up otherwise to be human, because we know if we're not going to go beyond here, right? This is how far I can go with that. But right up until then, I can empathize. I can, speak with the customers as if they're people too, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, and like an example of, if someone makes a claim of some sort, then that's also something where we on our end have to do investigations, like if there's a claim on one of our meals or something like that. So there's a fine line where agents have to be careful about. They have to be empathetic, but they also don't want to prejudge the situation and say anything that could indicate they're prejudging the situation when they don't really know what happened. So that's an example of one of the reasons why we have routing procedures, to make sure certain people are dealing with those who can be more educated. And here's how I can empathize, but also keep it within certain boundaries so that we still can do our due diligence and do an investigation and, not overshoot ourselves.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, just a couple minutes left. Don, if anybody uses Twitter, they may have noticed there are some rules and so forth that are going on. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on this. Yeah.
Just one or two. I'll bring it home by just saying that, at Twitter, and especially in the world that we have, which is content moderation, our currency is truly about gaining customer trust and providing credibility for the work that we do, because it's this exchange of ideas going, every moment of every day. And so we sit in the middle of that, trying to moderate it. And so, there is an era of building out the structure, the infrastructure so that we can have and can refer to the best policies, the best regulations, et cetera. Take for example, GDPR and some of the privacy elements that we've had to contend with. So all of those things obviously are extremely important to us, and it's one of the things that we try to balance. And in doing so, also providing a great customer experience. But there's two other elements that I also want to call out, and and customers hold us to it. You may hear about it quite a lot, and that is is Twitter biased? And it's this idea of, for the agents, we have to build the structure by which, in a particular market, in a particular region, that, just based on how you show up in the beliefs that you have as an agent, that doesn't seep into the work that you do or the cases that you action against. And so having, again, that structure in place so that we can stand up and say to any public official, we're not biased at Twitter. Our AI is not, geared in a particular way. I think it's been, something that's really, really important to us. And then lastly, what I would say is, on top of all of those things, what we've been driven to, double down and invest in is this idea of contextual understanding by market. And so that brings to light all of this conversation around policy, around risk factors that we have, because in each individual market, for every agent who's serving that market, you have to understand the context. So, a lot to what Doug said, even from a sports world, that resonates with me, that if you're sitting in a particular market as an agent and you don't know this particular football league and sort of some of the divisive things that may be said about a particular footballer, may it be in the UK and the Premier League, that makes you, or that renders you as an agent very ineffective. And so having that ability in a market to have the contextual understanding and investing there has been some of the areas that we've focused on and will continue to focus on over the next 12 to 18 months.
And to your point, football means different things in different markets altogether too. So last word to Don. Donald, thank you from Twitter. I think that the end of the story there is dynamic and always improving and always growing upon the things that you're learning. So thanks, Don, from Twitter. Colin Crowley, thank you from Freshly for joining us as well. Doug Cremon from ESPN and that mouse company as well. And special thanks, Emily Gray. Thank you. And the folks at Playvox for sponsoring this. Scott, we'll send it back over to you to wrap up. If you're still there, there you are.
Hi, guys. Yeah, thank you for handing back, Nicholas. And like he said, that wraps up today's webinar. Sorry for having to jump in and cut that short. I know it was a fantastic discussion today that probably could have gone on for at least another hour or so. We had a really great discussion there, and I hope everyone found it as formative as I did, and it was great to hear the panel as well, learning from each other. I'd like to thank our panelists today, Donald, Doug, Colin and Emily for taking the time and their expertise to join us today. And as usual, thank you to Nicholas for guiding the conversation today. Finally, a big thank you to today's sponsors, Playvox, for working with us on this hugely successful webinar. And if you would like to check out what they have to offer and how it can benefit your business, please head over to www.playvox.com or look out for more details that will be attached alongside the recording of today's webinar later in the week. Last but not least, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who joined us today, live or whether you're viewing this in the future on demand. I hope you enjoyed the discussion and gained some actionable takeaways. We have received a large amount of questions. We didn't manage to get through all of them today. So what I will do is I'll compile those and send those across to the panelists if they're directed at them, and get some answers and follow up there for any questions that we missed. But thank you from all of us at Reuters Events, and we hope to welcome you back soon to another great webinar. Have a great evening.